Whenever you're ready.
So can anyone tell me the difference between these two engines?
One's colorful.
Alright, well, we know this is colorful now. Well, one is a naturally aspirated engine while the other is a turbo engine. And they're both a 4AG model, so there's that, but this one has this thing right here that kind of looks like a snail, which makes it a turbo engine, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. The difference between the two engines. So as for credibility and as to why you guys should take my word as to why I know what I'm talking about, is, I've researched quite a bit of it, and I've gone to websites such as CarKeys, HowThingsWork.com, and stuff like that. And why you guys should care about this is the fact that most of you, if not all of you, will probably decide to get a car one day, and it's good for you guys to know what kind of engine you guys have, and the advantages and disadvantages of what's under your hood. Alright, first I'm going to explain how each engine works, and then I'll get into the upsides and the downsides of each one. Alright, so the main difference between these two engines is the way that they consume fuel. So a turbo engine is an engine that uses forced induction to get air into the engine. And I have a quote from CarKeys that says, compressing the air lets the engine squeeze more air into a cylinder. More air means more fuel can be added. The turbocharger uses the exhaust flow from the engine to spin a turbine, which in turn spins an air pump. So just saying that air is being forced into the combustion chamber, which creates more pressure and makes for a bigger explosion and increase in horsepower. In case you guys don't know what I'm talking about. It's right here, so air and fuel is forced into the first intake valve and into the combustion chamber. And then once it's combusted, the exhaust fumes go through the exhaust, what's called manifold, to the back end of the turbo over here, from the turbine. And then it spools out into the front end of the turbo and forces air through the intercooler since all the air is pretty heated up. And then it goes back into the combustion chamber, which creates more horsepower. Alright, so the way a naturally aspirated engine works is it just uses atmospheric pressure to mix fuel and air. So I will quote from How Things Work. And it says, a naturally aspirated engine uses its cylinders to draw in the fuel mixture under atmospheric pressure by suction action of pistons during induction. And atmospheric pressure is just another way of saying air around the intake. So it uses that air around the intake and gets its power from opening the throttle body and allowing air and fuel to get sucked into the combustion chamber. But instead of the exhaust fume powering a turbine, they're pushed out to pipe. Alright, so now that we know how each engine works, we can get into the advantages of each engine. So each engine has things about them that make them great. Like for a naturally aspirated engine, there are less moving parts, it's easier to keep cool, and they're easier to tune, and they're always getting power. So I'll quote here that says, properly done, a naturally aspirated engine will be able to get up and go at virtually any point in the RPM range. This shows how it's always getting power, and there's never any lag. Some pros for turbos are that they usually have more horsepower per liter. It's a cheap way to make a car faster, as it usually comes in like a kit. You can tune on the spot with boost control, and it's fuel efficient. So because turbo engines are predominantly run by exhaust gases which would otherwise go to waste, you don't lose anything running a turbo. This also means you're able to get more power out of a smaller engine without the need for upgrading. So this just shows how fuel efficient it is in that it uses the exhaust fumes to keep powering it. And that's also easier to make faster. Awesome. Right, so now that we know the advantages, we can get into the disadvantages. Disadvantages for naturally aspirated engine are that it costs more to increase horsepower. They usually don't make as much power as other engines, and they're less fuel efficient. And I have a quote from someone from Mercedes, and he says that the reason we changed to turbocharging is fuel efficiency. At the moment, the main point is consumption and reduction of CO2. If that stays the main point, I'm sure the industry stays with turbocharging. So this just shows how it's a lot less fuel efficient than other engines, as exhaust fumes just go out with the pipe. And so disadvantages for turbo are that there's always a lag in the first few thousand RPM, which is called turbo lag. It's easier to blow the motor because of increasing PSI too much. Some engines don't boost properly without meth injection systems, and they require more attention. So turbochargers get very hot and often tap into the engine's oil supply. This calls for additional plumbing and is more demanding on the engine oil. Right? So this quote just kind of speaks for itself in that you, with the turbo, you're more than likely to spend more money in keeping your car well maintained, and major services would definitely cost more. So all in all, each engine works differently and has its upsides and downsides, and they're different in how each one gets air into the engine, and they each way in their own unique ways and how one can cheaper to make faster, and the other never has any lag. So in conclusion, each engine is unique in its own way.
So Kyle, share with us what you thought.
I'd say you had good information about the differences between turbo and naturally aspirated engines, but I think you need to work on is like delivery and be more clear, because like at times I was like kind of confused at some points. Organization could be better. Transitions, you could work on really good, and then overall it's pretty good.
All right, Chris, I like the visual question that you have at the beginning. You know, you've got the two pictures that we're looking at, and you're asking us, can you tell, the difference between the two engines? That's okay. And then you kind of got a reveal answer slide. It's actually just an additional build on top of those pictures. That was okay. I do think we could use a little bit more explanation. I got to be honest with you, you're blocking my view of the turbo engine. So when you talked about this thing that looks like a snail, I'm not sure I saw the thing that looked like a snail. So you got to kind of be cognizant of everybody in the audience when you're using visuals, and so that was a little bit of a barrier there. I thought that you had a pretty good preview. It sounded to me like you were going to explain what the differences between the two are and what the advantages and disadvantages of each one was. That's clear. You said it at the beginning. I know where you're headed. That makes things easy to follow. There are several quotes that you have, but sometimes you kind of, when you're reading the quote, I don't want to. You have a tendency to drop your voice when you're reading. All right, when you start reading, so when you're talking to us a little bit, first of all, you've got a low kind of volume voice to begin with, and that's a little bit of an issue. But when you're talking and then you start reading something, it's like you drop down a little bit like that when you're talking and reading the thing, and it's like harder to hear. And I didn't always get a source citation. I think you gave us source citations on a couple of them, but it's a little bit hard to hear when you do that, and you have a tendency to do that. Like I said, every time you start reading again, it's like back down here, and then you look up a little bit, you're never shouting, but you're a little inconsistent on that, and that's something that you have to watch out for. The description of the difference between the two is pretty basic. I thought it was okay. When you go to the other visual to show us the process of the piston going, that part I understood. The part that I think was a little unclear was how the turbo changes that, how it gets the air in there more effectively than the aspirated engine, and I needed to have a clearer explanation. I think you kind of just point to that and say, see, it happens there, and I'm not sure that I understood why it happens there, what it is that it does, and how it does that. I don't know how else you might illustrate that, but I do know that you could probably describe it in a little bit more detail. So it's not that the illustration was problematic, it was the explanation of the illustration I think was a little thin, and it needed to be more engaging. I thought when you got to the section where you're talking about advantages and disadvantages, I thought you had a good transition there. I knew that you were done with the one thing and you were moving on to the next. I think you need to give us a little bit more, like at the beginning you talk about, well, everybody's going to need a car like this, and sometimes you make a choice, you got to think about what's going on. I think you need to kind of put it into a context and give us some examples. Somebody driving an aspirated engine, what kind of fuel efficiency are they going to have? Are they going to spend more money? Do they have a different kind of power that they have? I mean, let's describe driving a car like that a little bit. Maybe even give us an example of something. The same thing with a turbo. We're going to get a little bit extra power, but we're also going to get better mileage. That seems almost contradictory that you get those two things with the turbo. So how does that work? And your answer is, look, you're doing an economy car, you're making more efficient use of the fuel, so you'll probably feel the pickup a little bit more, but you won't notice it as much as when you're... Just some more description in your presentation, I think, is what's necessary to make it a little bit more interesting, as opposed to simply being kind of a technical description of what's going on. Remember, it's a speech too. It's not just, I'm explaining the technical stuff here, but you got to try and relate to the audience, and you have to make an effort to do that. Language can help you do those kinds of things. Detailed examples can help you do those sorts of things, and those are the things that I think you need to put into the presentation. All right, thank you.